In the accompanying graphic, what is the name for the section of the MAC address marked as unknown? Ethernet uses the media access control MAC address burned into each and every Ethernet network interface card. The MAC address is a 48-bit address written in hexadecimal format. The organizationally unique identifier is assigned by the IEEE to an organization. It is composed of 24 bits or 3 bytes that's supposedly unique to each and every adapter it manufactures. The high order bit, the individual or group bit, when it has a value of 0, we can assume that the address is a MAC address of a device and that it may appear as the source address in the source portion of the MAC address header. When it is set to 1, we can assume that the address represents either a broadcast or multicast address in Ethernet. The next bit is the global or local bit, sometimes called the GL bit or UL bit, where U means universal. When set to 0, this bit represents a globally administered address as assigned by the IEEE. When it is 1, it represents a locally governed and administered address. So the answer to this question, what is the name for the section of the MAC address marked as unknown? It is the organizationally unique identifier. The organizationally unique identifier is assigned by the IEEE to an organization composed of 24 bits or 3 bytes, which in turn assigns a globally administered address also comprising of 24 bits or 3 bytes that's supposedly unique to each and every adapter it manufactures. To answer this question, you need to know what carrier sense multiple access with collision detection is. It helps devices share the bandwidth evenly while preventing two devices from transmitting simultaneously on the same network medium. When a host wants to transmit over the network, it first checks for the presence of a digital signal on the wire. If all is clear and no other host is transmitting, the host will then proceed with its transmission. The transmitting host constantly monitors the wire to make sure no other host begin transmitting. If the host detects another signal on the wire, it sends out an extended jam signal that causes all nodes on the segment to stop sending data. Backoff algorithms determine when the colliding stations can retransmit. Backoff on an Ethernet network is the retransmission delay that's enforced when a collision occurs. When that happens, a host will resume transmission only after the forced time delay has expired. So what on an Ethernet network is the retransmission delay that is enforced when a collision occurs? We said it is called backoff. Backoff on an Ethernet network is the retransmission delay that is enforced when a collision occurs. Keep in mind that after the backoff has elapsed, all stations have equal priority to transmit data. On which type of device could the situation in the diagram occur? So this is a collision situation. The hub is the only device that cannot break a collision domain. A switch breaks a collision domain. A router can as well as a bridge. So the only device as mentioned in the chapter is the hub, which cannot break a collision domain. When using a hub, all ports are in the same collision domain, which will introduce collisions as shown between devices connected to the same hub. In the Ethernet 2 frame shown here, what is the function of the section labeled FCS? FCS stands for frame check sequence, and it stores a value called the cyclic redundancy checking value. Cyclic redundancy checking is a method of checking for errors in data that has been transmitted on a communications link. At the data link layer of the sending host, a cyclic redundancy check is run on the frame, and the answer to the cyclic redundancy check is placed in the frame check sequence or frame check sequence field found in the trailer of the frame. At the time that the frame is rebuilt on the receiving host, another cyclic redundancy check is run to make sure the frame is in proper order. So the right answer is error detection. A network interface port has collision detection and carrier sensing enabled on a shared twisted pair network. From this statement, what is known about the network interface port? The bandwidth available on a port does not determine whether collision would occur on that port. The answer to this question requires an understanding of the difference between half-duplex and full-duplex modes in Ethernet. Half-duplex Ethernet uses only one wire pair with a signal running in both directions on the wire. Half-duplex uses the carrier sense multiple access with collision detection protocol to help prevent collisions and to permit transmitting if one occurs. But full duplex Ethernet uses two pairs of wires at the same time instead of a single wire pair like half duplex. This means that full duplex data transfers happen a lot faster when compared to half duplex. Because the transmitted data is sent on a different set of wires than the received data, collisions will not happen. Hence, there is no need for carrier sense multiple access with collision detection for full duplex Ethernet. So back to this question, from this statement, what is known about the network interface port? This is an Ethernet port operating in half duplex because only half duplex has carrier sense multiple access with collision detection enabled. Half-duplex Ethernet networking uses a protocol called carrier sense multiple access with collision detection, which helps devices share the bandwidth evenly while preventing two devices from transmitting simultaneously on the same network. For what two purposes does the Ethernet protocol use physical addresses? A physical address is the hardware level address used by the Ethernet interface to communicate on the network. Every device must have a unique physical address. This is often referred to as its MAC or Media Access Control address. To communicate with devices on the same network, the devices will need to know all MAC addresses of the local devices. To communicate between devices in different networks, you will need to know their layer 3 or IP addresses. So for what two purposes does the Ethernet protocol use physical addresses? The first one is to uniquely identify devices at layer 2. It allows communication between different devices on the same network. A physical address or MAC addresses are used to identify devices at layer 2. MAC addresses are only used to communicate on the same network. To communicate on different networks, we have to use layer 3 addresses. Between which systems could you use a cable that uses the pinout pattern shown here? There are three cabling types in Ethernet: straight through cable, crossover cable, and rolled cable. A straight through cable is used to connect a host to a switch or hub, or a router to a switch or hub. 4 wires are used in a straight-through cable to connect Ethernet devices. It uses pins 1, 2, 3, and 6. Just connect pin 1 to pin 1, pin 2 to pin 2, pin 3 to pin 3, and pin 6 to pin 6. This would be a 10/100 Mbps Ethernet only cable and wouldn't work with gigabit voice or other LAN or WAN technology. A crossover cable can be used to connect a switch to switch, a hub to hub, a host to host, a hub to switch, router direct to host, router to router. The same 4 wires used in the straight-through cable are used in this cable, but we connect pins 1 to 3 and pins 2 to 6 on each side of the cable. For gigabit Ethernet, we make use of 4 wire pairs instead of 2. A road cable isn't used to connect any Ethernet connections together. You can use it to connect a host EIA TIA 232 interface to a router console serial communications port. So back to the question, between which systems could you use a cable that uses the pinout pattern shown here? This is the pinout pattern for a straight-through cable. And we said it can be used to connect a host to a switch, or a host to a hub, or a router to switch or hub. So D looks like the most likely answer. The cable shown is a straight-through cable which is used between dissimilar devices. In an Ethernet network, under what 2 scenarios can devices transmit? An Ethernet network is a shared environment, so all devices have the right to access the medium. If more than one device transmits simultaneously, the signals collide and cannot reach the destination. If a device detects another device sending, it will wait for a specified amount of time before attempting to transmit. When there is no traffic detected, a device will transmit its message. While this transmission is occurring, the device continues to listen for traffic or collisions on the land. After the message is sent, the device returns to its default listening mode. So under what 2 scenarios can devices transmit? Devices can transmit when they detect that no other devices are sending, or when the medium is idle. What type of cable uses the pinout shown here? Gigabit wiring requires 4 pairs of wires and uses more advanced electronics so that each and every pair in the cable can transmit simultaneously. In creating the gigabit crossover cable, you would still cross pins 1 to 3 and 2 to 6, but you would add 4 to 7 and 5 to 8. So this is an example of a crossover gigabit Ethernet cable. When configuring a terminal emulation program, which of the following is an incorrect setting? First of all, the terminal emulation program allows you to manage or configure your Cisco device. When configuring your terminal monitor, the protocol is set to serial, the baud rate is set to 9600, the data bits is set to 8 and not 1, the parity is set to none. So D is incorrect. Which part of a MAC address indicates whether the address is a locally or globally administered address? As mentioned earlier, Ethernet uses the media access control MAC address burned into every Ethernet network interface card. The high order bit, the IG or individual group bit, when it has a value of 0, we can assume that the address is a MAC address of a device and that it may appear in the source portion of the MAC header. When it is set to 1, we can assume that the address represents either a broadcast or multicast address in Ethernet. The next bit is the global or local bit, sometimes called the GL bit or UL bit, where U stands for universal. When set to 0, this bit represents a globally administered address as assigned by the IEEE. When it is set to 1, it represents a locally governed and administered address. So this is the GL or UL bit. What cable type uses the pinout arrangement shown below? This is the cabling arrangement for a rolled cable. If you have a Cisco router or switch, you would use this cable to connect your computer to the Cisco hardware. 8 wires are used in this cable to connect serial devices. To make these cables, just cut the end of one side of a straight-through cable, turn it over and put it back on with a new connector. Most often, the box your router or switches come in includes a rolled cable provided by Cisco. Which of the following is not one of the actions taken in the operation of carrier sense multiple access with collision detection when a collision occurs? First of all, when a collision occurs on an Ethernet LAN, the following happens. A jam signal informs all devices that a collision has occurred. It is true. The collision invokes a random backoff algorithm on all the systems in the domain, not just those involved in the collision domain. So this is not true. Third, each device on the segment stops transmitting for a short time until its backoff timer expires. That's true. All hosts have equal priority to transmit after the timers have expired. So this leaves us with B, which is wrong. So the collision domain invokes a random backoff algorithm on all systems, not just those informed or those involved in the collision. So the collision will invoke a backoff algorithm on all systems, not just the ones involved in the collision. Which of the following statements is false with regard to Ethernet? Now, when dealing with full duplex or half duplex Ethernet modes, remember that there are no collisions in full duplex modes. A dedicated switch port is required for each full duplex node. The host network card and the switch port must be capable of operating in full duplex mode. The default behavior of 10 base T and 100 base T host is 10 Mbps half duplex if the auto detect mechanism fails. So which of the following statements is false? There are a few collisions in full duplex mode. Remember, we say there are no collisions in full duplex mode, so this seems to be wrong. A dedicated switch port is required for each full duplex node. That's true. The host network card and the switch port must be capable of operating in full duplex mode to use full duplex. That's true. And the default behavior of 10 base T and 100 base T host is 100 Mbps half duplex if the auto detect mechanism fails. That's true. In the following diagram, identify the cable types required for connections A and B. A straight-through cable is used to connect a host to a switch. A straight-through cable is used to connect a host to a switch or to a hub. Or it can be used to connect a router to a switch or a hub. While a crossover cable can be used to connect a switch to switch, hub to hub, host to host, hub to switch, router direct to host, or router to router. So in our diagram, we would use a straight-through cable between B and the switch and a crossover cable between the switches. So B will be a straight-through cable. B will be a straight-through cable and A will be a crossover cable. The connection between the two switches requires a crossover, and the connection from the host to the switches requires a straight-through cable. In the following, match the cable type to the standard with which it goes. IEEE 802.3 typically connects 100 base TX, most commonly known as fast Ethernet. So we'll drag this here. IEEE 802.3 maps to 10 base T. It's 10 base T. IEEE 802.3 AB maps to 1000 base T, which can run up to 1 gigabits per second. So drag this here. And finally, IEEE 802.3Z maps to 1000 base SX, a standard for gigabit for 1 gigabit Ethernet running over multimode fiber optic cable. The cable used to connect to the console port on a router or switch is called what? As mentioned, the rolled cable is used to connect to the console port on a router or switch from a computer. Which of the following items does a socket comprise? When using a connection-oriented protocol like TCP, the transport layer takes the data segment, makes segments out of it, and establishes a reliable session by creating a virtual circuit. If you are using TCP, the virtual circuit is defined by the source and destination port number plus the source and destination IP address and called a socket. So the socket comprises of an IP address and a port number. Which of the following hexadecimal numbers converts to 26 to 28 in decimal? Well, for this you need to understand how to convert between decimal to binary and then binary to hexadecimal. So using your calculators or whatever method you choose to use, the answer is A. This is the representation of a fiber optics cable. Some main components of this cable are the core and the cladding. The core will hold the light and the cladding confines the light in the core. The tighter the cladding, the smaller the core, and when the core is small, less light will be sent, but it can go faster and further. There are two major types of fiber optics: single mode and multimode. Single mode is more expensive. It has a tighter cladding. It can go much further distances than multimode. Multimode has a looser cladding, has a larger core, so it allows multiple light particles to travel down the glass.